Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Filmmakers Flow podcast, episode 9. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about editing. And I want to, going specifically onto my thought process on what an editor is. What I'm going to be focusing on is that an editor is a storyteller. It's something I've talked about on my channel a lot, but really, as an editor, you are a storyteller. You're not just somebody who comes up with cool effects, somebody who's just there to make things look pretty, quote unquote. And by that, I mean just doing flashy transitions, trendy sounds, things that we see on social media, even in cinema. Like, you're not there just to make the thing pop and Hollywood magic this and that and the other. We're not there just for the tricks and the glamour. It's to create a story that is actually impactful for the viewers. And I'm saying we because I am, as you've probably known from watching this podcast, I edit professionally. I'm a documentary film editor. That's my primary, and then I also, edit the films that I direct, the short films and independent films that I make. And I've worked in the industry doing a whole bunch of different types of editing jobs and different content. And I want to kind of talk about some of the other jobs that you do as an editor. Well, first of all, let me focus on what I feel like the role of an editor is. And if you're talking about from the standpoint of working on a narrative film, short film, whatever the case may be, feature film, to me, an editor is really one of the director's primary or most important collaborators. There's a lot of people that's going to have their fingerprint on the making of a film throughout the process. The director is there pretty much throughout the entire thing, but outside of them, there's other key people, but an editor is really there, that final most important stretch, which is bringing all the pieces, all the puzzle pieces, all the different ingredients that the director has worked with all these other people who have contributed super important parts to making this film. The editor is there to help bring all that together and to help that final stretch and making sure that this story comes together. And I've even heard a definition, or I've even heard it said that an editor is kind of like doing another revision of for the writing process. Like, they are another person who is contributing to writing the film, because you have a script and some things can change while you're shooting it. So you might tweak some things. The director might tweak some stuff while they're on set shooting the film. Then you have that final step where you got like another part of it where the editor comes in and is now helping to shape and tell the story. But yeah, for sure, their role to me is to be that a very important collaborator to the director to help bring that vision, that story to life. And sometimes you have to deal with stuff that may not work the way it was intended. You got to be creative as well. You got to be a problem solver in some cases. Like, if a shot doesn't work the way that the director envisioned, you can't just throw it out and say, well, I guess that's it. It doesn't work. You got to be able to come up with a fix for that. And the director may already have an idea of how they want to fix it, but it's important for an editor, in my opinion, to be able to really be there, to be like their right hand, to be able to help them think through the process. I've done that where it's like, hey, we're running into this problem, and the director, trust me and my creative vision as well to, help them come up with a solution. So the director would probably be like, "Hey, I have this shot here, but this line isn't working. What do you think a way we can cover this up to make this still have the same impact or have the same effect that we're trying to create?" And I can make a suggestion, and the director can take it, or they might say, "No, that's not going to help. That's going away from what I want to do." But then they may also say, "No, that's actually really good. That can work. Let's go ahead and do that, but let's tweak this part of it." Whatever the case may be. And basically, all this I'm trying to say is leading to the point that you aren't there as an editor to impose your will, because the director of a film or whatever the project is that you're working on is the one that has the final say. And perfect scenario would be that you're working with someone who is down to hear suggestions, to hear input, to have some ideas, some back and forth, And a good director should want that because it helps you just bounce off ideas, come up with some different things. But at the end of the day, regardless of however many suggestions you make or things you bring to the table, the director's job is to overall craft the story. And you're, like I said, the major part of that as an editor. But you're not supposed to just impose your will and just overpower the director either. For an example, let's say you're an editor who has 30 plus years of experience. You've done everything, you know everything. You have all the tricks. You've edited every type of content that's known to man. You are the expert of experts, grandmaster of all editors. You are the editor of editors. Now, let's say that you are working with a relatively inexperienced or first-time director. That doesn't mean that you just like, all right, kid, shut up and listen to everything I say. You shouldn't do that, and a good editor wouldn't do that. That director would be, smart to hear your input about things because you have so much experience. But at the end of the day, it's their story. They are the hero, and you're like the wise old sage that's helping them along their journey. So you're not there to force them to do anything. You're there to guide. You're there to give suggestions. You're there to help them create the story that they have. Because although you have done everything and you may know all the right decisions to make and you never make a mistake when you edit, you hit the right thing, the right beat all the time, that doesn't mean that you know how this story that this director is trying to tell should go. Because each person has a vision for the story, the film that they're creating. And we as editors are there to collaborate with the director and help them. And that's both, and then that should go both ways. There should be a mutual respect there. The director shouldn't also just push you into a corner and not let you ever give any suggestions or ideas. Because if that's the situation that you're working in, then I'd be like, hey, yeah, that's not really a good working environment. That's not a working environment I would want to be in. I understand that I am there for the director, but at the same time, I don't want to not have any input at all. I don't want any of my ideas to ever, be considered. I don't want to just be like a mindless drone that's just making every cut, every shot, every moment of everything the way that they say it. Because that's the situation where I would say you probably need more of an assistant director, and you probably need more of an assistant editor if you have to micromanage every single detail. Like there's not a breath that I can't input something in. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things. And again, at the end of the day, the director does have overall, say. But it's kind of like when a director is working with a cinematographer, they're not going to look at the DP and say, why'd you use that light? I want you to use this light. And it's like, well, why do you care what light I'm using if I'm achieving, the outcome that you want? Same thing with the editor. It shouldn't matter, how I'm doing the edit or what I did to make your vision come forth. If I achieve the goal you wanted, that's what's important, and that's where I would come from from an editor standpoint. And that's the perfect, to me, collaboration. Some directors will be a lot more hands off. Some directors are very hands on. So each job will be different. Each project you work on will be different. You may have some people like, oh, I love collaborating with this person because maybe you get to input a lot more of yourself into it. And then maybe there's someone else you work with, and maybe nothing bad, but you just realize, okay, yeah, I'm definitely here to serve them to even a higher degree because they really aren't open to changes per se, but they do need someone to help them get this film to the finish line, and you're there to play that role. So your relationship's going to be different with every director. You just want to be able to do a good job and keep getting hired. So you want to be able to work well with anybody because you're going to have some difficult personalities sometimes, and you're going to have some great personalities and people you just click with. And hopefully you get to keep working with the people you click with. But, sometimes you will run into those situations. But the goal, like I said, is always to keep getting hired, and being a good editor will continue to get you hired. And this is some of the things that you can do to be a good editor. Yeah, I kind of touched on it before, but, some areas that you can work in as an editor and being a storyteller are like music videos. you might be working more with a band and a talent agency versus a director. So, that workflow might be a little bit different, but you still are there to create a story and collaborate, whether or not there's a director or whatever the case may be. You're still collaborating, and you still want to help whoever brought that project to you, because you didn't make the project up yourself. And maybe you are in a situation where the people who brought you in know absolutely nothing about anything, and they're like, hey, here's all the pieces, do whatever you can do. Those can be really fun sometimes, or sometimes I'd be like, oh my gosh, there's literally no direction here. I don't know what you want. Those can be frustrating because people can be picky in that they don't know what they want really. Well, I'll say that they probably know what they want. They just don't know how to communicate what they want. And those can be tricky. And that can be one of those that's a bit trying or testing, but you got to be able to flow with that as well and figure out and try to like read between the lines of what people are saying, because they may come off as like, oh, they're super chill, they don't care, but then you realize, okay, they gave me a whole lot of notes. It would have been so great to know this is the direction they wanted to go in before. So you also can't take things personally, because sometimes people just don't know what they want till they see something. I've had that. I feel like that's the most of the projects I worked on have been that way, where I'd be like, man, I wish I had known that before. I could have saved myself time and I wouldn't have went in that direction. But sometimes people just don't know until they see it. Or maybe they're like, oh, I see what they did, but that's not really what I meant. Let me figure out a better way to communicate my vision. So you got to have grace for people as well. It's just part of the job. Being an editor, you're not just there to cut, and you kind of got to know psychology. You kind of got to know how to handle human relationships. You got to be a good communicator. You got to be a good politician in some ways. And it's a lot of communication skills, people skills that are necessary when you're editing, being an editor as well. Even though it may not seem like it, because it's such a solitary job where you're like in a room somewhere by yourself, isolated from the rest of the world. But you're going to have some type of human connection, whether it's through email or over the phone or in person, and you want to be able to navigate those conversations you want to be able to navigate those conversations successfully as well. And that's another part of it, is that you want people to be able to walk away feeling good about working with you. Even if they may not have been the easiest person to work with, you still want them to be pleased with what you did. So something else I want to talk about is what I've done a lot of talking about what an editor does and what an editor is, but let's talk about what an editor is not, at least not traditionally. So an editor, first thing I want to say, editor is not a VFX artist. That is a completely different job, a completely different scope. Sometimes there's bleed over with those things, and a lot of these things are like VFX artists, colorist, sound mixer. We touch a lot of the same tools and same stuff, but we have very different specific disciplines and very specific skill sets that we've developed. So just because you're an editor does not mean that you're a VFX artist, and just because you're an editor does not mean that you're a sound mixer. And just because you are a editor does not mean that you are a colorist. This is the funny part, being an editor, you may touch all of those things at some point, especially when you're working on independent projects and smaller projects. You may end up having to wear a lot of those hats. And sometimes it's because people just don't know, or it could be that the budget's so small that people are like, can you help me out by doing these other things as well? Ideally, you can work in a traditional scope where you get to just focus on picture cutting, but sometimes you have to do more. In how I work, I am an editor, but I also do a lot of color grading as well. Even though I say I am the most proficient in my editing because I've been doing it the longest, I definitely have grown and developed my color grading skills as well. So I will also put that as an offering that I'll put out there as editor and colorist. Because sometimes people need both, and it's easier for them to say, okay, well, I can get you for editing and I can get you for color grading. But you want to make sure that that's known, that you are also adding this on, and that it's not all just, cause you want to make sure, because sometimes you might come into a situation where you're like, oh, I'm just an editor. And then they may be assuming that you're also going to be color grading. So make sure that that's clear ahead of time for your own sake before you take a job, because some people may just assume that's part of the process. They might not even know what a colorist is, or that that's even a position. They just kind of, I've heard people say, yeah, the editor is going to do the color. And it's like, okay, well, hold on. The editor is not also the colorist. There are some of us who do both, like myself. There are some who do both. But there are a lot of editors that will tell you, I am not a colorist. I do not color grade. That is a whole nother skill set, a whole nother thing that, people train years and go to school for and practice just that. That's a whole thing. And I would say another level, even on another level, not to say that's more important, but just like VFX art, being a VFX artist is a whole thing to itself. People have jobs where they literally just do VFX. They're not also cutting films and scenes and stuff like that. They're not doing that. They are making VFX art pieces or sequences for films, compositing, whatever the case. If you're doing some compositing or removals, whatever the case may be. That's a whole thing to itself. And that's like for myself, I don't do any of that. the most you're going to get from me is some simple masking. I can mask something. If you want something to be added in, I can add something in very simply. but if you want to be like, oh yeah, I need to create this creature. And okay, no, that's the VFX artist. You're not going to get that out of me. So I think a lot of people assume that as editors, we do all of that. And that's just why I want to just point that out, as if you're someone new getting into editing, just be watchful for that. Look out for that, because there are a lot of people who are probably just going to assume you can do that because you say you're an editor, because they assume that editors do all of that. But editors do not do all of those jobs traditionally. Each one of those is a whole department unto itself, with a whole set of people doing things in that realm. Not that you couldn't do all of it, and not to say that there aren't people who do. Like, I know colorists who also edit. I know editors who also color grade. I know VFX artists who also edit. But we all will probably tell you what our primary is, and what when you're hiring us. Well, okay, well, this is what I'm proficient in. I can do some VFX things, but don't expect this from me. You'll never hear me say I'm a sound mixer. Yeah, that's one. That's one right where I'm like, you got a sound person? Okay, cool. Because I am not proficient in that one. I can level it out for you. But if you want if you want some more advanced stuff than that, then you're gonna have to get somebody, because it's not something I don't put that in my offering anyway. But yeah, this is just a nice little overview. I wanted to kind of touch on editing. Editing is, like I said, near and dear to me, because that's what I primarily do in the industry. And if you're someone who's looking to get into it, hopefully this is just simple thought processes, things to help you kind of, focus in on what it is you want to do and what to expect getting into the industry as an editor. And if you're someone who has been editing for years, please feel free to leave comments below with your own thoughts and suggestions and ideas for anybody just getting started in the industry as an editor. So for all of my editors out there, the question of the week is going to be, what editing program or editing software do you use? And if you use more than one, let me know that as well. I want to also know how many dual or hybrid or multiple program users we got out there. So for example, I edit in DaVinci Resolve as well as Adobe Premiere. But that is it for this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Leave a comment below, giving me thoughts, feedback, suggestions, whatever the case may be. And until next time, just get out there and shoot something. No excuses.